I've seen a lot of places in my life, more than most people probably should. Cities that never sleep, deserts that swallow sound, forests so thick that sunlight barely touches the ground. I've driven thousands of miles across the United States and down through Mexico, from the dusty border towns where the air smells like gasoline and heat, to long, empty highways in Arizona where you can drive for an hour without seeing another pair of headlights. Truck stops at 3 in the morning, forgotten gas stations, abandoned motels where the neon sign still flickers, even though nobody has slept there in 20 years. After a while, when you spend enough time on the road, places start to blend together. But every once in a while, you find a place that sticks in your memory. Not because it was beautiful, not because it was famous, but because something about it felt wrong from the moment you arrived. The place I'm about to tell you about sits along the edge of a canyon so large it makes a man feel like a grain of sand in the desert wind. Most people know it as the Grand Canyon, and during the day, it's exactly what you'd expect. Tourists, cameras, buses, people leaning over railings taking pictures of the cliffs glowing red under the Arizona sun. But the part I'm talking about isn't the part tourists see. It's the quiet edge, the forgotten rim where the pavement ends and the land goes back to being wild. It happened many years ago when I was driving through northern Arizona in late autumn. I had been on the road all day, following a long highway that ran along the canyon rim for miles and miles. The sky was perfectly clear, the kind of deep desert blue that stretches forever, and the sun was slowly sinking toward the horizon, turning the canyon walls into layers of fire and shadow. By evening, the tourists had all disappeared. The buses were gone, the parking areas were empty, and the road felt abandoned. I remember noticing how quiet everything had become. No engines, no voices, just wind moving slowly across the rock. That's when I saw the road. It was just a narrow dirt path branching off the highway, the kind of service road that usually leads to a ranger station or a maintenance area. But this one had no sign, no barrier, nothing to tell you where it went. It just cut out into the desert toward the canyon. Now I've learned over the years that curiosity can lead you to places you probably shouldn't go. But it can also show you things most people never see. So without thinking too much about it, I slowed the truck, turned the wheel, and drove down that dirt road. At first the road looked ordinary enough. Dusty, uneven, surrounded by dry desert shrubs and scattered rocks. The tires crunched over gravel as I moved farther away from the highway. After a mile or two, I couldn't see the main road anymore. The desert had swallowed it behind low hills and jagged stone. The sun was getting lower now, casting long shadows across the ground, and the temperature was beginning to drop. The farther I drove, the rougher the road became. Small cliffs started appearing on either side, and the land began to slope downward toward the canyon. The wind picked up slightly, carrying that dry desert smell of dust and stone. I remember thinking that the place felt older than the rest of the canyon somehow, like it had been forgotten for a long time. Eventually, the road simply ended. No warning, no turnaround. Just a flat stretch of rock overlooking the canyon edge. I parked the truck there, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The silence hit me immediately. When you kill the engine in a place like that, it feels like the entire world suddenly stops moving. The sky had turned deep purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Out there, far from any city, The night sky is something most people never truly see. Thousands of stars stretching across the darkness like scattered diamonds. The Milky Way looked like a pale river cutting through the sky from horizon to horizon. It was beautiful in a way that makes you forget everything else for a moment. But when I walked closer to the canyon edge and looked down, the beauty faded into something else entirely. The canyon at night is a different world. During the day, you can see the layers of rock, the slopes, the river far below. But at night, the canyon becomes a massive black void. The walls disappear into shadow, and the bottom becomes invisible. It feels less like looking into a valley, and more like staring into an endless hole in the earth. The wind moved slowly through the canyon, producing a deep, hollow sound that echoed against the stone walls. It didn't sound like normal wind. It sounded almost like the canyon itself was breathing. I stood there for several minutes just listening. No birds, no insects, no distant animal calls, just that slow, echoing wind. Then I noticed something strange. Far below, somewhere deep in the darkness of the canyon, there was a light. At first, I thought it might be a camper's fire. People sometimes hike down into the canyon and stay overnight. That wasn't unusual. But this light was different. It flickered in short bursts, almost like someone was moving it back and forth. I watched it for a long time, maybe 10 minutes. The light shifted slightly along the canyon wall, disappearing behind rocks and then appearing again. Eventually, it started moving upward. Slowly at first, then a little faster. And that's when something about the whole situation stopped making sense. The canyon walls in that area were nearly vertical cliffs. There were no trails there, no paths that led up the side of the rock. Yet the light kept climbing, higher and higher along the wall as if someone was walking straight up the stone. I felt a small knot form in my stomach as I watched it. My brain tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a climber with ropes. Maybe it was a reflection from somewhere. But deep down, something about it felt wrong. Then the wind suddenly stopped. Just like that. One moment it was echoing through the canyon, and the next moment it was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had heard before. Even my own breathing sounded loud. That's when I heard the sound. It came from somewhere deep below in the canyon. At first it was faint, barely more than a whisper drifting upward through the darkness. But it was definitely a voice. I leaned forward slightly, trying to listen more carefully. The sound came again, longer this time, and something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The voice wasn't shouting words. It wasn't calling for help. It was repeating the same sound over and over again, almost like someone trying to imitate human speech without actually knowing how. The echo stretched the sound out across the canyon walls until it became warped and unnatural. I stayed there listening for nearly a minute. Then I realized something that made my stomach drop. The sound was getting closer. Slowly. Very slowly. But it was definitely rising up through the canyon, as if whatever was making that noise was climbing toward the rim, toward where I was standing. At that exact moment, the small light I had been watching suddenly appeared again halfway up the cliff face. Only now it wasn't flickering like before. It was steady. And it was much closer than it should have been. Close enough that I could see the faint outline of something moving behind it. Something tall. Something thin. Something climbing up the vertical rock like gravity didn't matter at all. I remember standing there frozen, staring down into the darkness, feeling a kind of cold that had nothing to do with the desert air. The voice echoed again from the canyon below, repeating that same broken imitation of human sound. And for the first time in my life, standing on the edge of that massive canyon under a sky full of stars, I had the unmistakable feeling that the thing climbing toward the rim wasn't a person, and it had already noticed that I was there. I remember standing there at the edge of that canyon longer than I should have. Every instinct in my body was telling me to get back in the truck and leave. But curiosity has always been a dangerous thing for a man like me. The light down on the canyon wall kept moving upward, slowly but steadily, and every time it appeared between the jagged rocks, it looked a little closer to the rim. At first, I tried to convince myself that it had to be a climber. Maybe someone with ropes. Maybe someone experienced enough to scale that kind of rock face. But the longer I watched, the more that explanation stopped making sense. The movement wasn't right. Climbers stop. They adjust their gear. They search for footholds. Whatever was moving down there never stopped, never hesitated. It just kept rising along the vertical stone like a spider crawling across a wall. The light it carried swayed slightly from side to side, and behind it, I could make out a silhouette, long and narrow, stretching up the rock face. I felt that cold, tightening feeling in my chest again. Then the sound came back, that voice from the canyon. Only this time, it was louder. It drifted upward through the darkness, in a slow echo that bounced from wall to wall until it reached the rim where I stood. The sound still wasn't words. It was something trying to be words, like someone who had heard human voices before but didn't understand them. The tone rose and fell in strange, broken patterns that made it impossible to ignore. I stepped back from the edge without even realizing I was doing it. The desert air had grown colder now, and the stars above looked sharper, brighter, almost too clear. I glanced toward my truck sitting behind me in the dark clearing. For the first time since arriving there, I thought seriously about leaving. But something made me look back down into the canyon one more time. The light had climbed higher, much higher than it should have in the time I'd been standing there. And now I could see the shape behind it more clearly. It was tall, far taller than any person should have been compared to the scale of the canyon wall. Its limbs looked wrong too, bending in ways that didn't look natural as it climbed. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing, like it kept trying to correct the image into something normal. But the more I stared, the clearer it became that nothing about that shape was normal at all. Then the voice echoed again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from deep in the canyon anymore. It was much closer. Close enough that the sound seemed to rise directly from the cliff face beneath me. That was the moment something inside me snapped out of the strange trance I'd been in. I turned around and walked quickly toward the truck. The gravel crunched loudly under my boots, breaking the silence that had settled over the desert. I opened the door, climbed inside, and slammed it shut harder than I meant to. The cab suddenly felt small and dark around me. I sat there for a second, gripping the steering wheel, listening. At first there was nothing, just my own breathing. Then the voice came again. This time it didn't echo through the canyon. This time it sounded like it came from somewhere behind the truck. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head toward the rear window. The clearing behind me was empty, just black desert stretching out toward the rocks and shrubs. But something about the darkness felt different now, like it was hiding movement. I shook my head and told myself I was imagining things. The desert can play tricks on your mind at night. Still, I reached down and turned the key in the ignition. The truck's engine roared to life, shattering the silence like a gunshot. The headlights cut across the clearing, illuminating the dirt road that led back toward the highway. I shifted the truck into reverse and slowly began backing up so I could turn around. That's when the headlights swept across the ground near the edge of the canyon. And that's when I saw the footprints. They hadn't been there before. I was certain of that. The dirt near the cliff had been smooth, except for my own tracks when I walked to the edge. But now there were others, long, narrow impressions pressed into the dust, spaced farther apart than any human steps. They led straight from the canyon rim toward the truck. My stomach dropped as I realized where they ended. Right behind the vehicle. I slammed the truck into drive and hit the gas harder than I meant to. The tires spun in the loose gravel before finally grabbing the dirt road and launching the truck forward. Dust exploded behind me as I sped away from the clearing. The narrow road twisted through the desert, and the truck bounced violently over the uneven ground. In the rearview mirror, the canyon edge disappeared into darkness. But the feeling that something was still behind me refused to fade. After a minute or two, I glanced back again. And that's when I saw it. Something tall standing at the far end of the clearing where I had parked. Even at that distance, the shape looked wrong. Too thin, too long. Its arms hung almost to the ground, and the light I had seen climbing the canyon wall was still glowing faintly near its head. For a moment it didn't move. It just stood there watching as my truck raced away down the road. Then the voice drifted across the desert again, carried faintly by the wind that had finally returned. The same broken imitation of a human sound. I didn't slow down until the dirt road finally reconnected with the highway. When I reached the pavement, I kept driving without stopping, heading east through the dark Arizona desert for hours before pulling over at a gas station near midnight. I never told anyone about what happened that night. Not the rangers, not the people at the station. After enough years on the road, you learn that some things are better left alone. But every once in a while, I still think about that canyon. I think about the footprints in the dust and the shape standing at the edge of the cliffs. And sometimes when I'm driving late at night through empty country, when the road stretches ahead of me and the desert feels too quiet, I remember something that still bothers me more than anything else. When I looked in the rearview mirror one last time before the clearing disappeared, the thing at the canyon rim had started moving again. Not climbing down into the canyon, not walking away into the desert. It had stepped onto the dirt road, the same road I had just driven down. And it had begun walking in the same direction I was going.